All right, this week we're going to talk about evolution, ecology, and taxonomy. This is a list of the learning objectives that we're going to cover. I'm going to start by doing an introduction to evolution. So before we begin talking about evolution, it's important to mention that this is a theory. Now, this theory is strongly supported by scientific research, but it's just a theory. For this class, since it is a biology class, you're required to know the details of the theory. I'm not requiring you to actually believe in the theory, you just have to know what it's about. So, continuing on, why does this giraffe have a long neck? Why do these bleeding heart flowers have such a strange shape? Evolution explains the features of all organisms from microbes to humans. Evolution is descent with modification, changes in heritable traits from generation to generation. So if we write down the definition for evolution, it's a change in heritable traits from generation to generation. This is different from heredity. Heredity is talking about the changes in traits from parent to offspring, or the passage of those traits from parent to offspring. Here we're talking about a change in the heritable traits from generation to generation. So there's a difference between evolution and heredity. A population is a group of interbreeding organisms of the same species. Evolution occurs in a population when allele frequencies change from one generation to the next. So allele frequencies is talking about the frequency of a particular form of a gene in a population. Evolution is detectable by examining the population's gene pool, or the entire collection of genes and alleles. Even for the same species, gene pools differ from population to population. The gene pool for a population of Swedes differs from that of a population of Asians. If Swedes migrate to Asia and interbreed with locals, then allele frequencies in the gene pool will change, and evolution has occurred. So there were numerous people that had scientific thought and proposed thoughts about the natural world, but it wasn't until Darwin came along that the theory of evolution evolved. Get it? The theory of evolution evolved. Anyways, okay. So Charles Darwin was the naturalist on the HMS Beagle, which is a ship that sailed around the world in the 1830s. Darwin's time on the Galapagos Islands was especially influential to the development of evolutionary thought. He described 14 distinct types of finch, each different from the birds on the mainland, yet sharing some features. In particular, the beak shape of the finches varied depending on the food supply on each island. Darwin thought that these 14 finch species had probably descended from a single ancestral type of finch. So, today, you can go visit Ecuador and you can take a plane from Ecuador to the Galapagos Islands and walk the path that Darwin walked and look at the birds that Darwin was evaluating. But basically what he noticed was that there were some finches on the main island, and then on each of the different islands in the Galapagos Islands, a similar type of finch existed, but they all had different beaks. And their beak shape was different based on the food source that was found on those islands. So he thought that those birds came over from the mainland, landed on those islands, and by selection, like natural selection, birds with particular beaks were able to eat that food source on that island. So over many, many generations, the beak shape changed depending on what food was available on the island. Artificial selection, or selective breeding, also helped Darwin form the theory of evolution by natural selection. In artificial selection, a human chooses desired features, then only allows the individuals that best express those qualities to reproduce. So if we go back to this picture, all of these plants came from selective breeding of the wild mustard plant. So people that are completely against genetically modified organisms, in other words, organisms that were derived by scientists intervening with the genetics of particular plants or animals, those types of people should never eat broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, kale, cabbage. All of these came from selective breeding from the wild mustard plant. And all of our dog breeds are due to artificial selection. So humans are choosing desirable traits and allowing those individuals to breed to create these different types of organisms. In natural selection, the environment kind of selects for certain traits. So environmental factors cause the differential reproductive success of individuals with particular genotypes. In the case of the birds, the ones that had particular shaped beaks were able to eat. So they were able to survive in order to pass their traits on to their offspring. So the logic of natural selection. So first there's genetic variation. Within a species, no two individuals are exactly alike. Some of this variation is heritable. Then there's limited resources. So every habitat comes with a carrying capacity. That's the maximum number of organisms that it can support. So limited resources. Then you overproduce offspring. So more individuals are born than survive to reproduce. There's a struggle for existence. There's unequal reproductive success. And then you have descent with modification. So over many generations, natural selection can change the characteristics of populations, even giving rise to new species. This seahorse blends almost perfectly into its habitat. How can an organism like this arise? Well, with each generation, the best camouflaged individuals survive to reproduce. The alleles conferring camouflage become more common in each generation. Thus, you have survival of the fittest. If all of a sudden all of the coral were to turn gray, were to die and turn gray in color, and that's something that's happening. The coral reefs are dying off due to acidification of the water. So if it all turned white, then the individuals that expressed a little bit more white would be able to best blend in with their environment and hide from predators. So those individuals would be able to reproduce. So their offspring would be a little bit more white. And then only the white ones would be able to survive, because if the environment, all this coral, all of a sudden turned white and died, then that white trait would be the trait that was survivable. Or that increased survivability. So because we would have descent with modification, that would be survival of the fittest, and that's evolution. But natural selection does not create camouflage alleles. Instead, it strongly selects for camouflage alleles that arise by chance. So some individuals are already a little bit more white, and those ones that are a little bit more white would have an advantage. They would be able to camouflage in with the coral should the coral turn white in color. So those traits already exist, and they exist due to the variation in the genes or in the alleles of genes in populations. Natural selection operates on the variation present in a population. Since more individuals are born than resources can support, the struggle to survive is inevitable. Some individuals in a population are better than others at surviving and reproducing. A good example of evolution is antibiotic resistance. If a patient receives an antibiotic for a particular infection, there's a chance that there's a mutation in that population where one of them is resistant to a drug. If one of them is resistant to a drug and the patient takes the drug is going to kill off a majority of the ones that are not resistant. But let's say that the patient did not take the full course of antibiotic or not take the correct dose of antibiotic. If you don't kill off all of these or enough of these, then you're going to have safety in numbers. So this one resistant one will be hidden amongst many that are non-resistant. So they're going to be able to overgrow, and as you take the drug and as time progresses, the ones that were susceptible to the drug will die off, but the one that's resistant to the drug is going to keep replicating. If the antibiotic is present, the antibiotic is then going to select for the ones that are resistant, killing off the ones that are susceptible. And that's how you have antibiotic resistance develop. It's not that the patient took the drug and all of a sudden one of the bacteria said, oh no, a drug's coming in, I better mutate real quick. It's that mutation already existed in one of the organisms from within that patient. And as you expose that patient to the antibiotic, it killed off the ones that did not have that that were not resistant, did not have that resistance gene, leaving the one that was resistant. Antibiotics cannot create a resistance allele. The variation in resistance was already present in the population. The presence of antibiotic caused the resistance allele frequency to shift. So that has to do with survivability. Survival of the fittest. But there's also this other aspect. If you survive and don't reproduce, then you're not passing on the traits of survivability to your offspring. So at face value, building complex nests, flashing showy plumage, and butting heads with rival males all appear to waste energy. How can natural selection allow for traits that apparently reduce survival? Sexual selection is a type of natural selection resulting from variation in the ability to obtain mates. Sexual selection is a strong driving force to why male animals do such crazy and elaborate behaviors in order to kind of attract a mate. So sexual selection is a driving force of natural selection and evolution. Excuse me. Generations of choosy females have selected for males with nest-building traits or elaborate ornamentation, and those are allowed to go on to reproduce.